Hi, everybody. Welcome to Zoom and Zim. We had started our conversation and it turns out tech was playing silly buggers with us. So we're having to start again. But what that means is I get an opportunity to spend a little bit more time with our panelists tonight, which I'm really excited about. Tonight's conversation follows through from last week's, where I had a panel of CEOs hailing from the financial services across insurance. We had hedge funds, we had corporate and investment banking represented. And with so much to unpack about the industry in Africa, I thought it might be a good idea to have a round two. Round two, looking specifically at the Zimbabwean market with all its challenges and its dynamics. We thought, there are people out there who've stuck it out and who've either gone away, come back, but have found it quite a habitable market where the rest of us outside might think, crikey, how do you do it? So on tonight's show, I've got Mucha, who's the Group Chief HRO from CBZ Holdings, Rungano Innocent Nyaude, who's a Director at Standard Chartered Bank. He works with the Financial Institutions Group. And we have Titi Hope Matandwa, who's a Group Business Analyst, aka an economist at FMB Capital Holdings in Harare. Welcome, everybody.
Thank you.
So given we've got a lot of catching up to do, I'm just going to dive into it really quickly. Us sitting out in the diaspora tend to look at the Zimbabwean market, as I said earlier on, and panic and think, how do you deal with its turbulence? How do you go to work and not know what's going to happen with your FX trading? How do you go to work and not understand whether the rates are going to shift dramatically from morning to evening? And whilst we're not delving into the economics and into monetary policy and all that stuff, I do want to know what it's like for people working in Zim. So thinking about that new entrant into the market who's thinking about their next or their first career, in fact, what is it like to join the financial services back home? And I don't think there's anyone more apt than Nyasha to start us off. So Nyasha, you're in Zim, you're working with human resources. This is your baby. Tell us a little bit about the market in Zim.
Okay, well, if you're looking at any bright mind who really wants to make a difference, a person who wants to apply their mind somewhere where you don't have to follow a template, somewhere where you're thinking every day and there is no day that is the same, this really is the place to be able to use any fertile mind in terms of being able to hone your skills. So if you're looking for growth, if you're looking for opportunity, if you're looking for a place to make your difference, and really the chance to test things out and to be able to apply some of the things you know in theory and do things a little differently, Zim is the place.
Wonderful. And I'm going to come to you, Titi. You're in Zim, you've been working there for a while now. What appeal have you found out of the Zimbabwean market? What's kept you there?
For me, it's because of its difference to anything that's out there. It keeps you on your toes because things are constantly changing every day. So whether it's in a particular role that you're doing, the way you're doing things today is not necessarily the way you're doing things tomorrow. So it makes you a much broader, minded person compared to being in other markets, I believe. So if you survive working in Zim, you can essentially work anywhere else and be on top of your game because Zim is unlike any other economy. I'm sure everybody can attest to that. So for me, that's what keeps me going, it's that drive to say what's happening tomorrow and how am I going to tackle it,
Now, the fascinating thing is people would normally say once you work in New York, you can work anywhere. So to hear that from a Zim perspective is a first from my perspective, but quite encouraging to hear all the same. Innocent, you ran away. You're in Dubai. Talk us through your kind of skipping ship. What is it about perhaps the global economy that drew you from Zim?
For me, it was more of an opportunity to explore and to gain experience. I left Zim just a year after I'd started my graduate training program with Standard Chartered. So it was an exploratory journey rather to go gain a bit of experience, gain exposure, because the main difference for me between being out of Zim and Zim is the exposure side of things. You get to see how things are done differently. Like Nasha had said, in Zim, you're always on your toes, getting to do on the go and learning on the go. Having been outside Zim for a couple of years, I think the greatest difference is to see how things are done differently. And for me, it's even more interesting because currently I cover markets like Egypt, Morocco, Iraq. They are not your typical good markets to say. They are markets which have their own volatilities, and bringing in the experience from the Zim side of things into the mix, into analyzing and assessing how other economies are handling it, is what has been a journey for me. And hopefully one day I'll be bringing that experience back to Zim.
And I guess for people who are kind of thinking about that first gig outside of Zim, there's always this reluctance, if you like, or perhaps a discomfort, a mental block. Am I going to fit into the real world, right? So I've left Zim, I've had a way of working where I can go into work in the morning and say Makadi Gushunko to my boss, and that's what he expects. That's quite natural to him. But actually going into a new market, the dynamics are completely different. I'm going to stick with you for a second, Innocent, and just kind of find out from you how different you found the Middle East to Zim. I've got my views on this because I've worked the Middle Eastern market, I've worked Europe, but actually I haven't had that experience in Zimbabwe. So it'd be interesting to hear your views on this.
I'll put it in two stages. The initial stage when I came to the Middle East the first time in 2010, it was totally different and the markets were totally different. The good thing was in Zim, you get to learn the fundamentals, the principles of banking to the core. So I walked into a market where one of my first tasks was to work on a $2 billion transaction. I had never seen a $2 billion transaction. So I had to adapt and put aside the figures, take it back down a notch to the small figures that we were used to back in Zim and still apply the same principles. It's a totally different culture and market, language barriers as well. So it's been a journey. The one thing is you get to work a lot harder outside as compared to when you're in Zim. Again, as you say, you get to know your boss at a very personal level. You get to know the families and so forth. You get to know how to work with people. Now, if you come to a different market, you have to prove yourself. That journey itself is a bit different.
Nyasha, when you hear this, you get to work harder. How does this make you feel as a HR professional? Because your expectation is that you're putting in the hard graft regardless of where you are, right?
I think we have to forgive Innocent. He's been away for 10 years. Come back, and we'll show you some hard work.
No, I actually would imagine that it is really quite hard because you're contending with AI, you're contending with inflation, you're contending with monetary and fiscal policies that change sometimes quite rapidly, FX, shortages in the market. So there are all manner of dynamics that I would think make banking really challenging. When you're thinking about your human capital, how do you keep them motivated in those sorts of environments, Nyasha?
Okay, so I suppose motivation is a really, really difficult one, hey, because aside from motivation in Zim right now, the key thing is to be able to see when it comes to Maslow's hierarchy of needs, have you got the basic needs of your staff taken care of? And I think that's the one thing about this environment is that it forces us to go back to that because you can then start talking about motivation and the bells and whistles. But if you don't have a structure whereby someone has got the dignity to be able to feed their family, to be able to put their kids through school, then anything that you do over and above that is really not going to be of much use. So here you are contending with resetting the base on a daily basis, looking and tracking for that. And then on top of that, of course, as you say, really being able to motivate staff and being able to see that the staff that you have are people who are agile, the team that you have are people who can change with the tide, change with the times all of the time, as well as keep on bringing their A game to work, being able to keep their chins up and being able to bring cutting edge things to the market as well. You're not going to survive in Zimbabwe. You're not going to take a company forward if you do what used to be done 10 years ago. We all know that the solutions for the crisis we're going through now are not the same solutions for the crisis we went through, over a decade ago. So agility, the ability to change really quickly are really key when you're looking at employees in Zim.
And would you suggest then that Zim employees have got a resilience that's quite unique? And I do wonder how adaptable we are when we leave Zim and things are normal, because we assume that adaptability requires some form of chaos and you've kind of got to strive and you perform best in really harsh environments. When you go to places that are normal, quote unquote, do you think that it's an easy transition? Because that assimilation tends to be quite harrowing for people that I've certainly spoken to, where they just can't find their feet quickly enough because they're not used to working in normal environments. Tsitsi, what's your take on that?
I think I have a different thought to what you've just said, Mucha, because, okay, from just, assessing on the ground, I've actually found that most Zimbabweans tend to adapt, and even beyond their comfort zones, beyond what they have been trained to do, because a lot of the times they are desperate. When I live here as an economist or as a business analyst, I go to Dubai or to the UK, it may not necessarily be the first thing that I get on the table, because probably opportunities are for the citizens there first, not foreigners, So a lot of the times we then end up just taking on what comes quickly, and we adapt and we work. So I wouldn't agree that, we really tend to struggle to fit in, because like I said, we have gone through a lot. And like I said, I think we have the ability to really think and work outside of, the confines of a role that you've been given. And you have that ability, like as Innocent had said before, to learn on the go at any given time. So no matter how different it is, I think that ability generally, the human capital in Zim, I think we have that ability to, fit in quite quickly.
I'm going to play devil's advocate for a second here and say, if I'm thinking about an economist coming from an environment where the economics don't appear to work, to the rest of the world at least, there's something about the perception, I suppose, of your trades that may start you off on a poor footing. So just thinking about how competitive you are to somebody coming from a market that really just kind of works, and you can pick up a textbook and the laws of economics apply right across the board. I can imagine a hiring manager in a more advanced economy thinking, I don't doubt your intellect. I don't doubt that you know what you're talking about, but is it tried and tested in a way that I can apply to this market? I'm going to go to the HR professional for response to this. How do you think that plays out in the real world? Is there a confidence, I guess, coming out of the Zimbabwean market that employers elsewhere would think, actually, no question about it, this is the person for the job?
Well, I think if we look at the world over, the amount of Zimbabweans who are outside of Zim and who are really successfully plying their trade speaks for itself. It means that the Zimbabwean pedigree is well sought after. And the fact that we've got so many Zimbabweans who are not only keeping their jobs, but rising to really, really prominent positions shows that it's not just the reputation of the pedigree, but that in terms of delivering, a Zimbabwean does deliver. Change comes two ways, and settling with change comes two ways. One might think that, when it comes to degree of difficulty, going from a tough market to one which is more stable is going to be a challenge. But if you put, for example, if you take a child who is writing and printing and you're trying to teach them cursive, going across that curve is incredibly difficult to learn. But take the child who has mastered writing and cursive and tell them to start printing. That's also incredibly difficult. So the agility of the Zimbabwean, and it doesn't mean that going from Zim to one market is the only difficulty, is the only change. Much as a person coming from a stable market and coming to Zim is going to be absolutely shocked and shattered and going to wonder, how is it that I can work in this environment? But the statistics speak for themselves. The amount of people we have in top positions speak for themselves. The Zim pedigree is really something else on the job market.
And there's absolutely no question in my mind about that. As I say, I'm just kind of, just playing that little advocate.
Yes.
So we know that you're absolutely brilliant and great at what you do. This is really me just kind of picking because I can. Innocent, coming back to you then. Working in markets such as Morocco, North Africa, culturally, it's not quite Africa in the way that we're used to, right? Because they're more inclined to the Middle Eastern style of work. How have you found your prep coming as a graduate trainee has enabled you, I suppose, to navigate these sorts of markets? Because again, there's a bit of a culture shock coming over here. Everything from the lead times to closing business, right down to that initial conversation where actually I'm not really interested in talking business with you just yet. I want to know who you are. I want to know how many kids you have. I want to know how many wives you have even. That tends to be more interesting sometimes than actually I'm just here to close this transaction with you. Have you found it easy?
For me, it was a bit easy in the sense that Standard Chartered is quite a global institution. So you find that, so I started in Qatar, and the office would have around 20% of the staff being Qatari. The rest of the staff is from all over the place. So because of that cultural mix, you then get it a bit easy to adapt. And we already had some Zimbabweans there as well. So it was quite easy. As a global institution, you then have a way of handling the clients. If the client is more Arabic speaking, you then have an Arabic speaker always present with your team. And again, being a global institution, dealing with global clients, they also get to want to be part of the global world. So they've also learned a lot of the languages, the cultures of the international world, and it was quite a bit easy. I just wanted to touch maybe on the question that you had asked earlier about the normal, and say Zim has its own situation, but every other place has their own situation. Egypt 4 years ago was going through what Zimbabwe is going through now: foreign currency shortages, fuel shortages, and so forth. You go to Qatar today, there's a blockade between the Middle Eastern countries. They're dealing with their own crisis. They had to find a way to have agriculture in a desert because they couldn't just bring in food. And you look at today, the oil markets, the oil producing countries are suffering because of the oil prices. So everywhere you go, there's a different form of a crisis. So in terms of adaptability to a crisis, as an economist, the fundamentals will remain the same. You're analyzing the oil prices, you're analyzing the fuel prices, you're analyzing this and that based on the fundamentals. So in as much as you can move from Zim crisis, you're also going into a different kind of crisis elsewhere.
Okay, so if our starting position then is Zim is the ultimate training ground for adaptability. And we adapt to not having enough water. We adapt to fuel shortages on the ground and having to queue up for hours on end. There are all manner of sort of stresses that stress test us to the max. I would wonder then, from a graduate trainee perspective, in fact, I'll start with you, Nyasha. Could you just walk me through what the environment is with a reported 90%, or at least speculated 90% unemployment rate in Zim? There are often questions around how capable the market is to ever grow fast enough to absorb this growing population of unemployed youth. And given how brilliant Zimbabweans are, the UZ is going to be full, NUST is going to be full of students who anywhere else in the world would be absorbed quite easily. Do you have a robust program in Zim, or do you find that banks, your competition, and you guys have got a way of really just making sure that your talent pool is competitive, it's current, and helps you with a competitive edge globally?
Well, when it comes to being able to pick on the best talent, unemployment is a double-edged sword. It really is harrowing. It's really scary how when people come out of university, only a tiny amount can find a job. You put out an advert, a placement for an intern, for a graduate trainee. For one position, you can get between 800 and 1,000 CVs. Trying to pick the best from 800 to 1,000 CVs is also an incredible feat. It means that for an employer, you really have the best pickings and you can really go through the motions and be able to find yourself the very best person. For the people who are on the other side, I think that the biggest challenge really is by the time you pick 1 out of 1,000, it doesn't mean that the other 999 aren't worth their salt. You've actually got some people out of those 999 who are incredible talent and who you put by the wayside. And so once you have got somebody in, I think that there is an appreciation that being able to get into formal employment, being able to get onto that first rung of your career ladder, is something that people really have to take and grasp with 2 hands. The bigger challenge, however, Mucha, I think, is we've got an economy which has got a very low turnover when it comes to staff. When people get into a job, they tend to stay in the job. So the bigger challenge for me around graduate trainees is that you have got this massive pool of millennials. You've got this massive pool of bright talent, and they get into an organization, and the risk is really people being stuck in a graduate trainee job. Whereas when you look at other countries in the world, by the age 33, someone is a CEO. Here, you tend to then have discussions around, at age 33, is he ready to be a middle manager yet? And
oh, wow, sure.
Yes. So I think that
and
for me was the challenge around GTs.
Sure, and I actually did want to touch on succession planning and career progression, which we'll dive into shortly. Before we do that, though, just wondering from what you've said, the idea of brain drain. So yes, we've still got this incredible pool of talent, but do we fear that the better talent is leaving the country and servicing all the other economies on earth and doing exceptionally well at it, but don't feel incentivized to come and plug that back home?
So look, I wouldn't exactly say the best is going. I think there's a balance, to be honest, because It's anyone who's had a chance to get an opportunity to look for greener pastures outside of the borders. Like Nyasha was saying, we still have the best students coming out of universities and your technical institutions and so forth. And it's not everybody who actually gets the opportunity to go out there. So I think there's still quite a good pool of very good skills in the country, even though the brain drain is going on. But it's usually actually people that have had an opportunity to work, because the belief is you're better marketable out there if you've had some form of experience, as opposed to when you're, straight out of college, unless you've done your college out of the country already, So a lot of the people will still be here because they still want to get an opportunity to get a bit of experience, get some skills going on, and then leave, So yeah, it's not necessarily the case.
Sure. So Nyasha, you touched on a couple of points that resonate with me. I've worked for a global financial institution where literally every year there's a 10% of the lower performing percentile that's culled from the organization. The idea being you want to keep your talent fresh, you want to keep people on their toes, you want to keep them productive. And I'm really excited to see Audrey Mlambo has joined us. She's kind of pointing to this point as well. Audrey, you should be here, but we understand
where are you, Audrey?
So there's this culling exercise that keeps people motivated to be top of class, because if you snooze, you lose. How do we maintain like that hunger? Yes, it's one thing to be hungry for a role for economic purposes, but that's not necessarily kind of keeping you refreshing your mind and keeping you innovative in the way that you do work, or indeed just being productive. How do you kind of balance this need to provide job security with the need to just kind of keep people active and thinking critically?
So I think there it's going to differ from company to company. And one of the big challenges that we do have in Zimbabwe is when it does come to the culture. So when I'm talking about when it comes to the culture in terms of staying in a job until retirement, I mean, if we were to look at talent, we call it the talent pipeline. If you were to look at the talent pipeline as a hose pipe, as you say, in order for you to bring fresh talent in, you have to exit some talent. So whether it is using a bottom 10%, whether it is through performance measures, whether it is through people finding other job opportunities, you find that as water is flowing through out of the hose, that's the only way that more water can flow into the hose. The challenge that we face, however, is that once a person rises to a certain level of seniority, you kind of stay there. And if you've got no movement from the top, that's what blocks the opportunity for fresh talent to come in from the bottom. So I think that the challenge is actually not really about, these young people and keeping people inspired, which is really key. But if your talent at the top is not moving, how is it that you create the opportunities? And that's an incredibly uncomfortable discussion to have. To say to a leader, you're saying you have a successor, but you are 45. You're 20 years away from retirement. Where are you going for your successor to be able to take on your position? In other economies, people have got places to go to. People have got options. But here, I think that your financial stability, being able to school your kids, it really is about, let me try and stay in this job for a long time. So there's very uncomfortable discussions and a very big mindset shift, which needs to happen, I think, at the top of an organization in order for us to be able to replenish talent. I know that might sound controversial for some, but if you don't have talent moving out, you've got no opportunities to mobilize talent into a company.
Absolutely. And then when you think about the rate at which technology is moving and the requirement for innovation, and millennials are bringing it to the workplace with really creative ideas and financial products, if you've got this generational gap that prevents you from bringing viable business opportunities to the table, then you start stagnating at some point, which is really unfortunate. And what you find with most global firms is mobility is a big part of your work experience. So if you're a top performer, there is actually an expectation that you're working across various geographies. Now, for a local bank, that opportunity is quite limited, which then suggests to me that you're having to be creative, almost with an interbank type rotation, or creating experiences across various institutions. Counterintuitive as it might seem, perhaps that is how you navigate that. What do you think about this in a sense? Without mobility, like you might find in Standard Chartered Bank, what's the alternative?
I think it's quite difficult to find the opportunities to grow where there's a bit of stagnation in the system. But how I look at it is the opportunities. If an organization can give opportunities for people to go outside and look at it as a retaining of talent strategy. So, for example, I know when I left Zim back then, this was in the hype of 2008, 2009, that whole crisis. And it was like a strategy to say, let us retain some of our talent within the group by sending them outside. So as of today, I would have a little bit of an opportunity to come back and say, hey, Zim, I want to come back home, because I'm still technically their resource working outside, which is what the global institutions would have had as an ability to retain their talent. For the local institutions, it would be more of, my thinking would be having people rotating in different units and different departments, so that you get to learn various skills whilst you're on the job and spread your wings. You never know what will happen in one unit or the other, instead of always just specializing in one unit. That's how I would see retention of talent in a local organization.
But do you think that the leadership of local organizations open themselves up to that? Because again, the idea of going and working for a boss who doesn't quite know you're new to this, I don't know, you've come from working in equity markets, for instance, and you want to go and work for syndicated loans. These are very different types of products. Yes, they're all event products, but they require a different knowledge base. They require a different skill set. How do you balance the two? So you're kind of going from being that expert to starting again, which I would imagine puts people off. If you do not have robust training, you don't encourage mistakes, that culture of learning and being okay with errors on the job. I do wonder whether we lend ourselves towards this sort of culture that allows people to experiment, explore. If it doesn't work, there's something else waiting for you, or you're kind of talking yourself out of a job, essentially.
I think it's happening, and I think it's out there. Nyasha can correct me. But for me, what I saw, for example, was during my graduate trainee program, I was supposed to be rotating departments. But we just got so bogged down with a lot of things that were happening that didn't happen. But it didn't stop me from going to the other guy in treasury and say, can I sit with you for a day and see how you do things? Go to the other guy in operations and say, instead of just saying, can you get this done for me? I would say, can you show me how you get this done? So at the end of the day, I would learn a lot more from the various departments in an unofficial capacity, just by me taking the initiative to learn. In a given scenario, when you have to talk about a certain process or procedure, you actually know it end to end. By the end of the day, the senior person in that department is also going to notice that, hey, this person has interest in my unit. It's a different way of doing it as well, without compromising the actual work that's being done.
And there are a lot of comments coming through. In Tombi, I see you talking about this idea of being in the same role for 10 to 30 years because there is absolutely no room for movement at the top. Is that then lending itself, when you think about how banking is all about incentives, right? So you get bonuses for performance, your promotion typically is linked to what you're contributing to the bottom line. In an environment that is struggling to remain profitable, so profitability is an issue, you don't have that turnover, which means that you're retaining people in the same positions for long periods of time. Without an outlet and without the prospect of a plan B, how do you craft learning and development and really just allowing them to grow with that knowledge and agreement and acceptance even that this just may be it for the next 15 years? So I would imagine that there's quite a challenge on the learning and development side to just kind of keep people feeling that they've got something to wake up every morning for.
Yes. So Mucha, when it comes to the situation in Zimbabwe, we really must know that there are opportunities, there are ways to give opportunities. The situation is not ideal in that we are a very low turnover market, but certainly in terms of if you do have a leadership that reads up, that keeps current, there is a way for the same function to redefine itself. And that now comes down to the culture of leadership. People who are open to be able to say, can we have new ideas? How is it that we can do this? Keeping current, going on training opportunities, and more, you're starting to find with your bite-sized learning, we're seeing that on Coursera, we're seeing that on a number of these online courses. Yes, you can have somebody who you say, do you have a degree, and come and do this work. But I think really the opportunity now is for a leader to step back and say, hold on, do we have a different way of doing this? I've got this way of doing this, but what I need is for you to challenge me. Tell me the opposite. Tell me how else we can do this. Tell me how we can do it differently. And I can certainly say, and I don't think that it's offsides to say that I'm working in a local financial institution, but brilliant leadership, where that leadership and the leaders who we work with on our team certainly do have the ability to be able to bring in a difference. It's a journey, it's a long journey, but even in a market which is like Zimbabwe, the learning opportunities, the opportunities to develop your staff certainly are there. We've got a great future ahead of us in terms of developing that. Not there yet. It's not something to do in one step, but the chances are there.
And I think there's a lot to be said about that first mover's advantage. So being on the ground, having stuck it through all these cycles, at the point that Zimbabwe turns around, you do actually have a competitive edge from those newbies sort of trying to penetrate the market, which is absolutely phenomenal.
Mucha, on that as well. Yes. I was actually about to say, I think what you actually tend to notice in Zim because of this situation that we're discussing is you have a lot of movement across institutions. That's the only way that somebody actually gets to move up grade, if I can put it that way, because within their own institution, you tend to get stuck because there's no movement above you, so you don't go anywhere. So there's like a lot of exchanging of stuff, if I can put it that way, across banks in Zim, which I found is just one route people have gotten to either get a promotion or develop themselves further than where they've been stuck for a very long time.
So talking to this idea of development, let's talk about leadership development, and let's talk about women particularly. Globally, we've got concerns about the gender pay gap. We've got concerns about women in boardrooms, women in senior leadership positions. From what you've described to me, I'm curious to know, just off the top of your head, do we have senior representation? Of course, we've got you, Nyasha. Are you an exception? Are there other women who are running things in the banking space as females who've got the title chief alongside their name?
So am I an exception? No, definitely not. We don't have the kind of balance that we should have right now in Zimbabwe. And when I talk balance, probably one of the most key definitions that I've come across in my career in terms of diversity, when we're looking at diversity, is something that I learned when I was at British American Tobacco, which is that diversity is your workforce reflecting either your client base or your national demographic, which is a really easy way to put it, that, what is the proportion of women? What is the proportion of people who are differently abled? What is the proportion of your different races? What is the proportion of your different religions? And you serve your clientele best if your company inside is reflecting that. So certainly from that point of view, if we are talking about gender and gender equity, do most companies reflect the kind of gender balance in the country? Overall, one could say yes. However, when you come to senior management and you say, okay, if I take my statistics just at senior management, do we have representation? When it comes to women, no, the representation is not quite what it is when we look at the country's demographics. What I must hasten to say, however, is that there has been a wave of change in Zimbabwe. The last 2 years, we have seen an incredible amount of female leaders who've really been coming through. You have got all of the women who went before us, the women who really are the first women of color who were in key positions. These are people who are really well known in the market, your Pindi Nyandoros, your charities from Nedbank. So you've got a lot of your Grace Muradzikwa ex Nikos Diamond. So we've got a lot of women who opened the path for us. But you look at the last year and you can see an incredible number of women who are in really key and high positions. You've got Clara Mlambo, who is the COO for Liquid for the region. You've got Precious Murenanyika, who is the CEO now at Lafarge Holcim. You have got a number of women who have come into key management positions there. I'm only naming two, but Nestle is now headed by a woman of color. We have got Total Zimbabwe, which is also headed by women. So when you look at the right steps and when you look at women finally coming into their own and being put into positions because of competency, not just their gender, we really are seeing changes in the market.
So what's changed? What's triggered this wave of female leaders getting the recognition that's due to them? What tone at the top has kind of inspired this movement, if at all?
It would be for every company to say, but the one thing which strikes me is that it really is people who have got competence and who've got experience. So the one thing which strikes me and which comforts me is that we don't have token placements that we're seeing. What we're seeing is real people who've got real substance, people who have got real deep experience, and people who've got the competency to run things. So what I'm happy about is that it's not something where we are seeing that a market is saying, let us just have women for the sake of having women. It really is a story about competence and achievement.
Tsitsi, if you would consider the culture around going into work, Ruveniko touched on this on a previous show we had, this culture of going to work and greeting people by their totems. This doesn't happen anywhere else on earth. And I don't know if it happens in your organization, or you've heard stories. You may not want to talk about your organization specifically, but we hear stories about somebody coming in and saying, I'll keep talking about the one that I do always remember is Kushungo or Shumbanya Muziwa or whatever it is. Is that considered normal?
I think it's an institutional culture thing. I personally don't subscribe to that, because it really takes away from what you have to offer as an individual, professionally, your intellect and so forth. The moment you start going sekuru, mofu and so forth, it's just, yeah, that respect is gone. So I don't support that. But unfortunately, I think it's a Zimbabwean thing. But in some organizations, I have to say, I haven't seen it in my organization, but yeah, I've heard of it elsewhere,
Sure.
Yeah.
And Nyacha, you talked about diversity. Where Zimbabwe is quite homogenous in its diversity profile, so you don't really have that great variation that you might find in Berlin, for instance. I often wonder the extent to which the issue is not really paid attention to, because it's a given culturally that Varumi are the ones running business. You've come in, you are not necessarily, you're working in sometimes the support functions rather than the hardcore business line. It's really encouraging to hear that there are women starting to break through into various industry. But would you say that there's a lot more space, I guess, or the manifestation of equality should maybe be around the pay differentials? Do we have a gender pay gap issue in Zim? I know it exists everywhere else, but I'm just sort of trying to piece together what diversity and inclusion looks like in the Zimbabwean context.
So, Mucha, I think that for me to answer on that, I would need to have the data points. I wouldn't have the authority to answer on that without the data points. The only thing that I can do is work off A, assumption, and B, work off the experiences that I've had. You can come into a place where historically you have got certain salary levels, and you look at the payroll as an HR professional, and you see certain disparities and can ask, why are those disparities there? Can you please explain some more? And I think one of the challenges of an HR practitioner, and particularly when you're bringing change to the table and you're driving equity, is then to be able to take something like that by the horns and be able to see that what you instill is something which is equitable. I can only speak on my behalf. I can't speak on behalf of anybody else, but really equal work for equal pay. And gender should not come into it at all. Equity really comes down to, and these are the principles of job grading. What is the size and complexity of a job? And that is where issues of salary should begin and should end. And really, if you take out the names, if you take out the gender, if you take out the color, there should be no disparities other than, for example, special skill. And something like that should be something which is justifiable, should be something which really can be defined and a rationale can be given if you do have those exceptions.
And Innocent, just looking at you, so I kind of deliberately wanted you to be the only guy on this panel, because this is the complete reverse of what normally happens in my space, right? In my world, I'm the only girl at the table normally. And there's a lot of room for males in leadership positions to start to influence this culture. The culture that says women are there in administrative positions, women are there to serve the men in financial services. The idea being that, you struggle that much more, or you have to prove yourself that much more. to get a legitimate place at the table. I know that Stand Chart is quite big on this diversity and inclusion agenda, and you constantly see stuff on the internet and, you know, initiatives that I see over here in the Middle East. Just talk us through some of the best practice that you see in your world that may be worth sharing to our audience. How do you bring women to the table?
I think it's an issue of like Anyasha said, job grading. If there is a role, do you have the qualifications to do the job? That's it. It doesn't matter which background you're coming from, whether you're male or female. That's one. Two is you also have to look at geographically from where I sit. You look at the history. Look at Saudi, for example. Only a few years ago, women started to be allowed to drive. So that's something that also comes into play in terms of the cultures of the different countries that we'll be in. But more importantly, I think it's the drive that is being there now is men recognizing and institutions recognizing that from a historical perspective, there was some inequality happening. And now the drive to try and correct that is happening. It's obviously going to take a bit of time. From Star Child, I know there's a lot of work being done in terms of the gender pay gap, in terms of women in senior roles. So, for example, now in UAE, we have a female CEO. So all those things, they're going on globally. And it's a drive that institutions have to take personally and say, we need to drive this. Because certain cultures definitely go another way in terms of looking at how the male and female relationship works. And you also look at, like we were saying again, the issue of having people being in the same roles forever. You're talking of the men who got to those roles 20 years ago, right? And they're not moving as fast out. So it's also about churning those people out to get the new brand of leaders coming in, the female leaders coming into the space.
So a question for the ladies then off the back of that, which is to say, very often you get feedback for women reporting into women, that women are the hardest people to work for, right? Mm-hmm. What is it about our nature, or do you find that within you're having to be conscientious, if you like, about the way that you bring women along with you? Is it something that you think they should figure out on their own? What's your position on this whole women are the worst bosses?
Mm-hmm. I see Innocent laughing as he gets visions of women on violence.
Absolutely. But we hear this rhetoric all the time. Women are rubbish bosses. What do you think?
Tissy, do you want to go first? I don't want
to. You know, I think naturally, and I wouldn't think it's just a Zimbabwean thing, but just naturally, we are very competitive. So whether you are 5 steps ahead of me and I'm not going to catch up anytime soon, that threat is always there. So, and unfortunately, and I think women then, you know, tend to make that very known broadly to say, look, I'm not very supportive, and they would rather give different treatment, or whether it's opportunities that come along to a male colleague who is probably at the same level as you. So naturally, that's just how it is. But then again, I don't know, it could also be just naturally maybe, you know, the opposite genders work better together. I don't know. But yeah, what I've noticed is, women, we tend to really, you know, bring out the claws even in a professional environment, which is also probably the reason why, you know, historically it's difficult for us to be taken seriously and, you know, to move up the ladder as fast as we should, because we also then, you know, bring in emotions where we shouldn't. And, you know, so there's a lot of emotional maturity that is required for women to, I think, get as much opportunities as men do.
So I am the biggest advocate on the planet for changing this narrative, because I think it's absolutely rubbish. I think it's time that we actually do actively do something about this. Sorry, Nyash, I cut you off, but I'm going to give my 2p on this shortly.
That's fine. I was going to say that I don't know that I entirely agree with you know, women being emotive animals and the likes. I don't know that I entirely agree with that. You know, that by the time we get to the boardroom, by the time we get to appointing women to a senior position, we cannot discount all of the cultural nuances which have come before. So really, things really go beyond, okay, statistics and percentages and, how many women do we have there? If you stop and think, by the time you put in the hard hours for you to be able to get to an executive position, think of the man when work goes beyond 6 o'clock, 7 o'clock, 8 o'clock, 9 o'clock, in order for you to finish, to finish a project. They don't have to think about anything else. A woman, you need to think about, what about the kids? Have they eaten? What about the lunch boxes tomorrow? The man, by the time you get home at 9 p.m., somebody has cooked you this lovely meal, and all that you're doing is going to heat it up. So when it comes to the cultural aspect of it, women are at a disadvantage anyway. And that means that you need to work so much harder. When you then maybe look at the characteristics of that woman who can make it to the top, it needs to be a pretty badass woman who makes it to the top and who is able to power through all of that and able to cut through all of those cultural nuances and able to kind of stake their claim and say, yes, they're kids, but in order for our kids to be able to have a role model, or in order for our kids to be able to go to the best schools, this is what we're going to do. I, for example, had a move to South Africa. My first international assignment was with a 9-week-old baby. I moved with a baby who was 9 weeks old, started working with a baby who was 9 weeks old. And not everybody can do that, because some people have got cultures which judge them, look down upon that. You are given this mummy guilt. What kind of a mother are you? So let's take into account the reality of all of the background that comes with that. And by the time you've got a woman who can work her way through that, it is going to be, somebody who demands the best, somebody who says, no, this is what I require. And people then start to look at that as, excuse the language, but a corporate bitch, or she's really hard, and the likes. But I think let's not discount.
I'm firing off all cylinders right now, because we know of those women who start emasculating themselves because they're trying to fit into the boys' club. We know those ones who choose actually not to have family and then regret it post-menopause. So there are all these challenges and these hard decisions that women are making daily around.
This is a whole other topic.
Absolutely. We're coming to it. We're coming to the fireside with this one for sure. Innocent is dying to say something, I can tell. Go for it.
No, I was just going to say, I think the one difference that I've noticed is the way we network. So my male boss can be hard on me, but I have ways to interact with him outside the office a lot more. We're going to go out for a drink. We're going to go for a smoke. We're going to do whatever it takes for me to get to understand him a lot better. And like Nyasha said, I'm going to sit in the office with him until 9 p.m., until 10 p.m. Let's iron out whatever our differences are, and let's move on. But then for the disadvantage is, like Nyasha said, you have to rush home to the kids. You have a husband who's expecting to get home and have a meal on the table. So all those things tilt against the lady. So for me, my boss might be a hard gentleman, but I have more chances to get to iron them out with him outside office hours than my lady counterpart is going to have.
Okay, but you know that this is a fact. You know that she's got to rush home to the kids. You know that she may be logging in from home at 10 p.m. and working till 2 a.m. She doesn't have the opportunity to go and celebrate winning a big deal at the local strip club or whatever it is, because this happens in the industry, or certainly in the West. We don't have the opportunities very often, or we choose not to engage to that extent. Something's got to give, though, because for that to remain the thing that remains this disadvantage for women, you can't climb up as quickly, you don't have as much access to the boss, is just rubbish, really, I think. So coming back to HR, how do we start creating policies and thinking through cultural nuances that prevent women who are genuinely talented from scaling up the corporate ladder because they've got all this other responsibility outside their 9 to 5?
Is it around policy, or is it around character and context, in terms of what it is that, that then goes on? I can't imagine many companies that have got a policy about how it is that we celebrate, how it is that we network. And it really comes down to the character, it really comes down to the support structure of being able to put in support around you. I mean, I've come from the background whereby I didn't have guilt for not doing my kids' homework. the reason why I was working was to be able to hire a homework mother. And I actually did, during my 9-year international career, hire a homework mother, which was a teacher who would come to my house after work every day and take my kids through homework and write me notes and tell me what they were doing well and what they weren't. I'm not going to feel guilty. I'm working for me to earn. So yes, somebody else is going to do my kids' homework. Oh, how did your daughter do on this exercise? I don't know. I really don't know. I'm not going to pretend that I know. I don't. Sure. Because guess what? Sure. I was busy out earning in order to be able to put that same child, through private school. So these are some of the things where, in terms of what we accept as women, I'm not taking on the guilt, taking on that in order for us to be able to network, in order for us to be able to work the hours, it does take a certain sacrifice. But having said that, we must be careful not to judge and think that the women who do take the opportunity to say, I want to be home to do homework for my kids, we also have to be open not to judge that. There is absolutely nothing wrong with that. And there is everything that is admirable about it. So the balance really comes down to the human condition and respecting and knowing what the differences are. And that in itself is diversity and accepting that diversity.
So I've got a slightly different view to yours, and I hear everything that you're saying, Yasha. The view around policy, I do think that policy plays a role in this, because if you say that we've got a policy that allows remote working or that allows flexible working, that's a corporate policy. You need a culture that then works with that policy to make it effective, right? And normally that's where the disconnect is. So on paper, on those internet sites, we are talking about being that employer of choice, because guess what? We do all this amazing stuff for our women. But actually that woman who is opting to work from home or is having to leave early because she's got flexi work hours is being told, oh, working half day today, love. And, as she walks out of the office, there are all these sarcastic remarks that are passed on to her. We've all been there, done that. So I do think that policy has got some role to play in at least starting to shape the culture around some of these initiatives that make life a little bit easier for women in finance and in any other industry, quite frankly.
So Mucha, you're spot on, and policy does have to be able to direct that. But I think what I was talking around was more leaning towards innocence example of when it comes to celebrating, and that there really no policy can do that, and that really comes down to social context and nuance. And I think that's the space which I was talking around.
Okay, understood. Right, now, given that we're nearly an hour in already, if you'd believe that, I'm going to go around the table very quickly and ask you all to let me know. We've talked about policy, we've talked about diversity and inclusion, we've talked about the market dynamics, graduate recruitment, succession planning, the works. The one thing that you would want someone who's watching this show to recall from tonight's discussion would be what? So if you're thinking about that nugget of encouragement, why Zim, why Africa, why financial services, whatever it is that you really want to kind of sell to our viewers tonight around either what you do, the space that you occupy, please do go ahead and plug it in.
Yeah, sure. I think, I would want to focus more on the young upcoming guys that are looking for work, probably, since we're leaning more towards career development and so forth, to say, Zim is not entirely a bad place. Yes, the market fundamentals are not in the right place right now, but it's a very good place to start. It's a very good place to learn. It makes you, like I said before, a very open-minded person. You think outside of the box, and you can definitely place yourself anywhere in the world if you get a background coming from Zimbabwe. So you don't take 100% of the bad and not get a bit of what can actually place you out there somewhere in the world. So that would be my main takeaway point for anybody who's listening out there, who's, particularly maybe working in the financial sector. Yes, there may not be opportunities for you to go up the ladder, but you can definitely be a well-rounded person in terms of the experience that you get.
The first thing that I'll say is learn new skills. In a market that is volatile, a lot of things are changing every day. So get to learn new skills. Imagine, I'll give an example of an ATM. In Zim, on one day, an ATM is very important because we've got cash that's oozing out. The next day, it's no longer there. right? And it's redundant. So learn new skills, get to be able to be versatile in whatever you're doing. Someone said, no one can take away what you've learned. So whether you've learned it or you're applying it or not, you've learned it, no one is going to take it away. And the last thing that I would say is networking. It's one of the most important things to make you survive in any global system. Network, network, network. I also heard a quote which says, luck is an opportunity that meets preparedness. Imagine if you're prepared, you've learned, you network, then you get to meet people who can give you opportunities. But if you're not prepared and you're not networking, those opportunities are not going to come your way.
If I start with where Innocent ended, networking honestly is really, really key. They say that the harder you work, the luckier you get. So it does take hard work to be able to get somewhere. It does take hard work and sacrifice. And also when it comes to challenges, I really would like people who are watching and who are trying to look for their next to come away with the message that you create opportunities. Yes, there is a part of waiting for opportunities to come your way, but even if it's in the workplace, challenging the status quo, looking at an alternative way of doing things and looking for a sponsor within the organization, someone who can help your voice to be heard, someone who can assist you in terms of how it is that I navigate, looking for a sponsor or a mentor outside of the organization, creating opportunities. And honestly, the world can be your oyster. It's not everybody who gets to be successful and gets to hit the C-suite, but that doesn't stop a person from growing. It doesn't stop us from learning. And the challenges are here to take on in Zim. And even if your job doesn't give you the opportunity to be able to shine, you've certainly got the opportunity to learn more.
Wonderful, guys. If you're in an auditorium listening to this, you would be clapping hands and cheering on all these fantastic nuggets. So go ahead and give us some likes and comment and endorse the things that have been said by our amazing panelists tonight. I'm going to be the voice of Kudakwashe Dube Chigumira, who says women engage beast mode because they need to push harder to prove themselves beyond societal bias. True. Absolutely spot on. Beast mode all the way for the women on this panel. For those watching, I can see I've got some heavy hitters who've joined us tonight. So lovely to see our corporate beasts out there. And we've come to the top of our hour. So sadly, I'm going to have to call time. I'd love you guys to let us know what you think. If any of the panelists have an opportunity to go back and feed into the comments, that would be amazing. But you've all been such a brilliant panel. Thank you so much for your candor. Thank you for your time, and I'm hopeful that we can dip into your wisdoms and knowledge in future when we've got something that might be relevant to the sector or indeed to your areas of expertise. Take care, guys. All the best.
Thanks.
Thanks very much, Mucha.